Okay, so Auburn Ole Miss, our game of the week, and it really lived up to its billing. I think 40-29 is kind of a little deceiving given the action in that game and how close it was with just 6 or 7 minutes left in the ball game. There's some missed opportunities for Ole Miss here, but I think we also saw Auburn really step up in a road game where the pressure is starting to show up for Auburn in terms of expectations, given how they've won the last few games. Looking at the numbers, 554 for Auburn, 570 for Ole Miss, and even in the per play averages, I think they kind of shown. We'll see what your models, how they compare to your model, but I think they kind of shown. We saw what we've seen from these teams throughout the year relative to what we were going to expect. So get into that a little bit. What did these teams do relative to what our model predicted, not just in the score, but also in these yards per play averages, and did we see what we thought we were going to see?
Yeah, in certain ways we did, right? In certain ways we didn't. But I will tell you that where the model was like freaky bang on was run stats. And the model based off opponent averages said that Auburn would average 5.96 yards per carry. Okay. Auburn averaged 5.9 yards per carry. It said that Ole Miss would average 3.4 yards per carry. Ole Miss averaged 3.4 yards per carry. So it predicted the exact per play rush average for both teams in that ball game. So anything that happened in terms of how Auburn was able to run the ball, and this wasn't Auburn running at will, it's not just like we thought that might happen. I mean, it went exactly the way that we thought it would. The one thing that was a little different is, the model was saying that Ole Miss would have about 7 yards per pass, Auburn would have 7.5. Both teams exceeded that. Ole Miss slightly 7.9, but Auburn had 11.2 yards per attempt. Now here's the rub with that though, and this is something we talked about for why this game was predicted to be closer. Oh, Auburn may have averaged 11 yards per attempt, and Ole Miss averaged 7.9. Ole Miss threw 3 times as many passes as Auburn did. So that 11 yard per attempt average, it was only on 15 completions, and 7.9 yard per attempt. Well, that's not as good. Yeah, but they completed over about 2.5 times as many passes, 36 passes. So Auburn, on the other hand, rushed 52 times for 5.9 yards per carry. And what that means is the per play averages for both teams, like we talked about, really probably, well, they don't reflect what the model said it was. And we said the reason why Auburn was a lot closer to score to Ole Miss in the model, even though they had a yard and a half per play average advantage, is that Ole Miss focuses on what they do really well, which is pass the ball, way more than they focus on the run. And Auburn, which is a little more balanced and has a very good pass game, well, they have a very good pass game because they very seldom use it. And mostly they rely on that like 5 to 6 yard per carry rush total, where Ole Miss is continually getting, 8, 9 yards passing the ball. And so the averages you come out to are pretty deceptive because, Ole Miss is getting a lot of chunk yardage where Auburn has to grind it out.
So we saw what we've seen all year from Ole Miss, and it's frustrating if you're an Ole Miss fan, and it's going to continue. I'm going to predict losses in moderate to big games for teams like Ole Miss until I'm proven wrong. Can't run it, can't defend the run. You're going to lose the game.
Yeah, and people can talk all they want about the drop pass and what could have been with Evan Ingram, but we've talked about this all year. The passing game is inherently volatile. It is inherently random. Stuff goes wrong. And if you're relying on a 30-yard pass to win you the ball game like that, you need to accept the fact that sometimes you're going to drop the ball. And when you're playing, in Alabama, that play is probably going to work just as well against Alabama and Auburn as it will against Mississippi State. The problem is when you're playing Alabama, and you complete that pass, you may win the game. But when you play Mississippi State or Auburn and you don't complete the pass, you're going to lose it. So it's weird, right? I mean, when you're playing bad teams where you're just trying to consistently move your offense, if you're doing it running the ball like Auburn does, game in, game out, you're going to get yards and you're going to get points. And if you're doing it trying to use deep passes like Ole Miss, yeah, it can be effective on anybody, but it can also be ineffective on anybody. And the problem too, I think, is I think it almost is ineffective more often than not, is what we're seeing. Like, even in games where it works, and at the start of this game, Chad Kelly was on freaking fire. He still got cold later.
And kind of what we saw here and where we've seen it fail is exactly what you were talking about. When we did the preview of this game, Chad Kelly for most of this game was out of his mind. And he was making throws that if you're relying on those throws as your offense, especially because you can't run it, you're doomed, man. You can't count on Tom Brady to make all these throws. And Chad Kelly is going to be an NFL quarterback. The guy he's shown that he can do it, especially on big stages in big games. But you can't rely on that week in and week out, because what if he's putting the ball in the money, but they get the drops, Auburn, I thought, defended pretty well for a team that gave up 465 yards of passing offense, although a place they struggled was defending wheel routes, check downs. Backs were getting 12, 15 yards on third down. But for the most part, the throws that Kelly was making were really low probability, just perfect throws on a night where he was really on. If he wasn't on just a little bit, this game is boat race city.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there. And, the fact that Cameron Petway, again, 7.9 yards per carry for Cameron Petway. It's crazy. But the problem is he was getting that play after play after play, and the longer the game goes on, the better he gets as the other team wears down. So it's incredible pressure for Ole Miss to continue to operate at a high level, where Auburn basically just has to keep the gears turning, and they're going to move down the field and score. And that was the pressure we saw. But even still, I think both of us noted the same thing during this game. Ole Miss had a chance to win it. And the interesting thing to me, that you noted, and I think it was about halfway through the game, you noted there were two drives that the center
Right.
cost them the game, or center cost points, right? False starts where the center on both drives where the center failed
Snap it in
to
time.
snap it in time, and then there was on the second drive, when they went for it on fourth down, right? The center snapped the ball into the ground, and all Ole Miss had to do was get a 1 yard first down. But because the center snapped the ball into the ground, the quarterback who was trying to backup quarterback goes to pick it up to run it, has to turn to pick up the ball. And by the time he gets it and starts running forward, he's tackled in the backfield, turnover on downs. That was 11 points. It was the first one ended with a field goal, the second with a turnover on downs. 11-point swing, and they lost by 11 points. So, and I'm not saying that, all that's close and a lot of things come into play, but this was a darn close game that really got decided by minor differences in how Ole Miss was ineffective on certain plays. But again, it's Auburn didn't have to be perfect on everything they did. They just had to do it all pretty well, and they would grind their way down the field, and they were going to put points on the board. The way Ole Miss operates, yes, it can be effective against even very, very good defenses, but they have to run it at a very high level, because if and when they screw up, they're going to
It's
stall.
funny because I texted an Auburn friend of mine with 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter, and I said, that's ball game. And he was like, what do you mean that's ball game? There's 12 minutes left in the game, and we're only up by one. I said, that's ball game because Ole Miss in the first half was hitting on all of these high risk, high reward, low probability plays. They were hitting them bam, 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 but they couldn't stop Auburn. But they were able to keep up with them for the whole first three quarters of the game. But eventually that was going to run out. Well, what was going to run out was them being able to execute offensively. But Auburn, because of the nature of how they were getting their points, like you said, it's a lot less variable. It's a lot more reliable, especially against a team that can't defend the run. And when Ole Miss punted, they had a 3-and-out, and they punted with 12 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. I knew it. I was like, they can't stop Auburn. They have to score every time, or at least show that they can move the ball. They're still in that rhythm. They were out of that rhythm. That was the end of the game. They could have called it right then and there.
Yeah, and sort of as a final point on this one, we said going into the game we thought Auburn would win. Our model had this 33-27. I said that I didn't feel like it would be quite that close. I thought it would more. I think I said something like 44-21. And, maybe I was a little off and the answer was in between where the model had it and where I had it. But I mean, at the end of the day, both of us, we said the same thing, which is if you can't run the ball and you can't defend the run, it is extremely hard to have enough consistency to win a football game. And Ole Miss is, and it is largely due to injury, right? I mean, there's no doubt when the center went out in that ball game, they were just done. Like that, the whole Ole Miss offense just basically collapsed at that point. The fact that they lost their starting left tackle, I mean, this is not the same Ole Miss team that we saw against Florida State or Alabama or Georgia early in the year, where they were firing on a lot of cylinders offensively. They are a shell of that team, and they're a shell defensively. So, I mean, it may be a rough rest of the season for Ole Miss, but again, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, and I have to backtrack, but you've got to have a little hesitation on how much you want to read into Auburn's success. Um, a lot of this, the truth is, and I know, we're an SEC fan site, but again, we call it like it is. Not a great year for the SEC. It didn't start great, but the truth is, it's actually probably gotten worse because a lot of the, Ole Miss and Tennessee were kind of dark horse teams in their divisions, and they are just decimated due to injury. Arkansas is completely run out of gas. And all of a sudden, the reason we're seeing Kentucky and South Carolina and some of those schools start to reach up and, win some games, honestly, it's because the teams, that second tier set of teams is really kind of coming apart at the
And I'll
seams.
disagree with you a little bit there. First of all, I think a lot of what we're saying about this Ole Miss Auburn game sort of minimizes what Auburn was able to do, and what they have been able to do in terms of offensive identity. Where I'll agree with you on Auburn is in this run, they've yet to play a team who plays good run defense. The only one they played was LSU, and they almost lost that game. So it is interesting to see if this offensive consistency holds up against a team like Alabama, who's probably the only great run defense they're going to see the rest of the year, or if they kind of fall back to earth. One thing I would like to ask you, though, because we talk about this from time to time in terms of top quarterbacks in the SEC, and we like to reshuffle and reevaluate as we get new information, would you consider as a third-team All-SEC quarterback Sean White?
Yes, I would. I mean, his statistics merit it at this point, and I know that's sort of, well, it's not a cop out, right? I mean, you can't put him you can't ignore what he's done statistically. His per play average is phenomenal. He's not turning the ball over. Um, I mean, he's just executing at a really really darn high level, and because of that, yeah, I mean, I could definitely put him as third team. I mean, out of curiosity, who'd you put the first two? I guess it would be
I think Kelly's taken back that spot. If you put Chad Kelly on an Alabama, Auburn, LSU type team, it's over. Like, hang it up. Like, the guy is that good. Even with the weird turnovers that he has sometimes, he's a little careless with the ball. I think it's going to prove out come draft day, right? I think he's going to be, he might be the first or second quarterback off the board.
yeah. I think I right now I still think he's a first day pick. But I'm more curious about the second guy. I guess maybe Austin Allen, but Trevor Knight is only ninth in the conference in yards per attempt. His QB rating is not particularly high. I'm not sure that Sean White isn't. I think Sean White and Austin Allen are vying for second in the SEC, and the way Arkansas is trending, I'm not sure White's not your second team.
Well, and I agree with that. Like, for me, honestly, like, Allen is sort of trending down, but he still has some tools that he's shown without the support around him that Sean White has. I think some of Sean White's effectiveness comes from the fact that Auburn runs it 50 times a game. Now, the thing that I love about Sean White is he's showing pretty good on third down, which is really important to that offense. And that's something they haven't had the last couple of years. I think that's important. To your point about Trevor Knight, the guy's a 50% passer. I mean, he's a 50% passer with a 6'2", 6'3" yard per attempt. I can't get too excited about that. I think he's an excellent runner. And I think he even showed that a little bit about against Alabama. I think he's an excellent runner. But as a quarterback, I can't get excited about a guy that completes 50% of his passes.
Yeah, I can buy that.
So one last thing on this game, and then we can wrap it up. I can't believe we're saying this, but Ole Miss sitting at 3-5. Do they make a bowl game this year? And let me give you their schedule. Georgia Southern at Texas A&M at Vanderbilt, and finish it off with Miss State. Got to win 3 out of 4. What do you think?
I think they do, but it's going to be the skin of their teeth. I mean, I can't see them beating Texas A&M. A&M is built to stop a high-power passing offense in a lot of ways. They've got good pass rushers, and their weakness is run defense. They have very good safeties, and A&M is the one of the best run offenses in the game. I mean, it's just a terrible matchup for Ole Miss. Besides the fact that A&M's a great team, Georgia Southern obviously is a pushover. Mississippi State this year, I mean, I know it's the Egg Bowl and all, but they ought to beat Mississippi State. Mississippi State is totally going in the tank. And then it's like we've talked about, Vandy is not that bad. And if Ole Miss continues to head in this wrong direction, considering how good Vanderbilt's defense is, and how susceptible to the run Ole Miss is, and again, when you give up the run that easily, even a Vanderbilt is going to be able to move the football on you. And suddenly, if you're playing a good pass defense, and Vanderbilt is a good pass defense, yeah, that game is probably gonna determine bowl eligibility for Ole Miss at this point.
And Vanderbilt's, where they struggle offensively, is going to see a little bit easier go of it against an Ole Miss team that can't defend anybody. And I know I said that was the last thing, but I want you to talk about this because this is interesting, and this is, I think, the core of the problem they have as a run defense. Can you talk for just a minute about their linebacker play? Because it's Hall of Fame bad.
Yeah, I mean it's bad. I mean they came into the year with a decent linebacking core, but due to injuries, due to players underperforming, they've had a lot of rotations, and now they've got these true freshmen on the field, and the run defense against Auburn. You see missed tackles and all, and I get that, but it was just the baffling lack of run fits. I mean, guys are so out of position, hitting the wrong hole. They're not, you see a counterplay and everybody's caught up in the wash. And it doesn't matter how good the players are or are not. If they're not where they're supposed to be, they can't make a play. And everything right now that Ole Miss is trying to do is completely hamstrung by the inability of their linebackers to make effective plays in space.
So they're 116th in rushing defense. Can you guess who is 128th out of 128?
No.
Arkansas.
Whew. Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, we talked about going in. Both of us were kind of baffled. First off, that they got all the hype they did going into going into that TCU game and coming out of it, right? That they big game with TCU, and then they beat them, and like, well, there's not a lot of evidence that TCU is any good this year. And then they come out of that, and Alabama was supposed to be this big matchup, and we're like, okay, both of us thought that Alabama was just going to run over them. Our A&M ran all over them. Auburn ran all over them, and at some point, people have got to sort of realize that Arkansas's run defense is just really, really, really bad.
Yeah, it's three of Auburn's 6 wins are against teams who are 100th or worse in run defense. So actually, I think 116th or worse because Lamo is 126th out of 128. Anyway, that's another kind of tangent that I sent you on, and I'm sorry, not sorry, because I think it's kind of worth noting how a team like Ole Miss can fall so far, so fast in something that they've historically been really good at, and that's run defense. They've given Alabama fits the last few years in terms of running the ball. So that's an interesting one. But guys, that's our review show for this week. Some interesting games. But not as interesting, I think, as the week we have coming up. So make sure you check out our preview show that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Again, we're chopping all of these up on YouTube in terms of individual shows instead of big, long shows. So give us feedback. Subscribe if you like it. Thumbs up if you like it. If you don't like it, at least give us a comment and tell us what we do wrong. So thanks so much, guys. Have a great week.